Hi everyone, it's Stephanie here and welcome back. In today's video, I'm going to be creating two different cards featuring the Snowflake Splendor stamp set. And what I want to do is I want to create a background with the stamps, and I'm going to use the same background on both of the panels. And then I'm going to use some watercoloring to add some color to the entire panel. So when I started out these cards, I had this idea in my head of doing white embossed snowflakes on a background and then adding in pinks and like aqua blue colors to create kind of like a wintry look in the background. So what I'm doing is I have a piece of watercolors cardstock here in my MISTI, and I have it positioned in the middle rather than kind of butted up into the corner because I want to be able to put the snowflakes kind of off the edge. And this is going to allow me to do that since I have the cardstock in the center of the MISTI instead of at the side. So what I'm doing is I'm just taking all of the snowflake stamps from this set. I'm pretty sure I used all of them, and I'm just kind of arranging them until I'm happy with the pattern that I've created. I did kind of move them around a few times, as you can see, because I was trying to make it so I had not all of the small ones grouped together. I was trying to kind of separate similar designs. So I did put a little bit of thought into how I was arranging them, and I really wanted to have them kind of spaced evenly and have the entire panel filled. So like I mentioned, I am going to do some heat embossing on here. So I'm using my magic powder bag here just to remove any static from that panel so that the embossing powder doesn't stick where we don't want it. And now I'm taking Versamark ink, which is just a clear sticky ink, and I'm stamping the snowflakes onto that panel. Now you're not going to see them on here since it is a clear ink, but they're definitely stamped on there. And what I'm going to do is just take some white embossing powder and I'm going to sprinkle that over top of the panel with a spoon. And I'm just kind of letting the excess powder fall back into my container. And you can see as I'm adding this, all of the snowflakes start to appear on the background. Before I heat set this one, I'm going to add the same stamped background to my other panel here. So I left the snowflakes positioned onto my MISTI door in exactly the same way. And I'm going to stamp this onto this panel here as well. So once again, I use that magic embossing bag just to remove any static, and then I'm stamping out the snowflakes with the same Versamark clear embossing ink. And then once again, I'm going to take my white embossing powder and completely coat this panel. Now this is a great way to mass produce cards, so if you have a design in mind and you want to make a bunch of them, you can just keep stamping the snowflakes continuously until you have the desired amount, and then you can heat emboss them all at the same time. So this is a great way to do any type of mass producing of cards, whether it be with snowflakes or some kind of other design background. So now I have them both heat embossed. You can kind of see those snowflakes. They are a little difficult to see still since they are white on a white background, but once we start to add our watercolors, they're going to kind of pop up off of that background. So in this palette, I have my Prima watercolors. I just have them combined into a larger palette, and I'm going to take a clean brush with some water, and I'm going to start to add water to these panels. So the first one here is the one that I envisioned first, which is the one I wanted to do with like pinks and blues and kind of have that mix of the purple that you kind of get when those two colors mix together. So I'm starting off first with the blue color, and I'm just kind of dabbing it into the center of the snowflakes. And you'll see as I paint these backgrounds, there's not any kind of technique I'm doing. It's not super fancy. I'm literally just adding color to this background. And for this one here, I started off on a dry piece of paper. So I didn't add any water first. I just went in with that color. And I concentrated it a lot on the center of the snowflakes. I kind of wanted it to bleed out and kind of show the snowflake with the blue. And then I wanted to add that pink kind of in between all of the snowflakes. So I realized when I first started to add the blue, it wasn't dark enough. So I started to darken up those areas. And then the first pink color that I chose was also way lighter than what I wanted. So I ended up changing that and picking a darker one and just kind of combined the color with water and added it until I was happy with it. I'm going to set that one aside to dry, and I'm going to move on to the second panel. And for this one, I decided to put the water onto the panel first, just to kind of see the difference I would get with the water on here and then adding the color in. For this second one, I also decided to change how I added the color. So rather than concentrate it around each individual snowflake, I decided to create a striped pattern across the entire panel. So I started first with a lime green color, and I added that to the top and bottom. I then went in with that same turquoisey blue color that we used on the first panel, and then I finished it off with the pink in the center. I love this color combination on winter and holiday cards, the green with the aqua and the pink, so I really wanted to translate it onto that background. So once I was happy with it, I once again set that aside to dry, and now we can work on the sentiment portion while we're waiting for our backgrounds to dry. So for the sentiments, I really wanted to use this large Celebrate die on one of the backgrounds, so I cut it from some white cardstock, and I believe I have 4 of them die cut here. And what I'm doing is I'm just gluing them one on top of another, and this is just going to give me a sentiment that has a little bit of thickness to it, so it's almost like a piece of chipboard. This is a quick and easy way to create a really bold sentiment to add to your card front. especially one that is going to be like the one we created where we have a lot going on in the background. I wanted to keep it white so it was still kind of subtle so we didn't take away fully from that watercolored snowflake background that we've created, but I also wanted to make sure it could stand on its own. So by adding a bunch of layers together, it just gives it a bit of definition and a lot of dimension, which really helps it to stand out. And one quick tip I want to mention if you are gluing words together like this is I like to keep the base word in the background piece, so when I die cut it, I don't remove the positive piece from the negative. If you keep it in the negative space, it keeps the word exactly shaped how it's meant to be, and as you add each layer on top, it forms the word properly, and then when you remove it, you have this really great die cut word. So it's just a really easy way to make sure that you keep the shape of the word as you're gluing it all together. Once I had the large Celebrate finished, I also knew I wanted a couple of secondary sentiments, so I'm stamping these onto a couple of strips of black cardstock. I'm using Versamark ink once again so that I can white heat emboss them, and I've chosen 2 sentiments from the Snow Globe sentiment stamp set that fit on these little strips perfectly and kind of work for both Christmas or holidays as well as winter. So I decided to kind of use one of each, and these are going to be what I add to the card fronts. I also decided to cut out a small snowflake using the Let It Snowflake 2 Die-namics, and I was going to add that one to the card that I didn't use the Celebrate on, but I ended up deciding not to use that. So even though it is on screen, I will decide that it is a little bit too busy for the background. So I'm just adding both of the finished panels to card bases. These are A2 size card bases that measure 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And for the first panel, I use Blue Raspberry, and for the second one here, I'm using Limelight. And then once I have those adhered, I'm going to go ahead and put the sentiments on. So I decided to use the Celebrate on the pink and blue card, and at first I was going to kind of do it up and down, and I decided I wanted to turn the card sideways because I really liked how the Celebrate kind of fit there. I'm going to pair that with the Happy Christmas sentiment strip, so I just trimmed that down so it would fit onto the card. I used my scissors and gave it a little bit of a slanted edge, and then I'm just going to add it on here with some liquid glue. I'm just kind of lining it up there, and then once I have that on, I'm going to add the same glue to the back of our Celebrate die cut piece here, and then I'm just going to adhere this directly over top of that sentiment strip. And I ended up loving this card. I really wasn't sure when I did the watercoloring. I didn't love the pink and blue watercolor that I added, but once I had all of the elements finished on here and put it all together, I really loved how this one turned out. Now this one was a little bit of a different story. I had a hard time figuring out where to put the sentiment. I didn't like the snowflake when I tried to add that, so I ended up just adding the sentiment strip on its own, and then I used some sequins and added those to the center of all the snowflakes just to kind of dress up that background a bit. I definitely prefer the Celebrate card over the 2 options. I really like how the snowflakes are highlighted in the background. And then I did add sequins to the Celebrate card as well. They're just kind of scattered around the background, not in the center of the snowflakes. And then I took some Stardust Stickles, which is just a glittery clear Stickles, and I added it to the center of all my sequins. And then once we have that done, we have finished our 2 cards, and we have these beautiful watercolor snowflake backgrounds that we've created. And you can change this up to be anything you want embossed in the background, and you can use any colors of watercolor that you prefer. Like I mentioned, this is a great way to mass produce a card set since you can do so many steps at once and then end up with a lot of cards once you're finished. If you're interested in any of the supplies that I've used, they're all linked in the video description below. Thank you so much for joining me in today's video, and I hope to see you in another one soon. Thanks for watching.